The sound came first, an engine, but from the wrong direction, from behind the mountains. You paused. The rope in your hands was still taut. The dock planks were wet under your feet. It was early morning, and the Hawaiian sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the water was already that color. That deep, impossible blue. The postcard color. The one tourists photographed. The engine sound got closer. You looked up, and in that moment, everything changed. Your name wasn't Tommy Reeves, but it was something like that. An ordinary name. An ordinary morning. 7:53 a.m. You were 26. You'd worked Pearl Harbor's docks for 4 years. You came from Ohio, a small town nobody wanted to stay in. You wanted something different from your father's life. He worked in a steel mill. You worked in a facility too, but at least this one was beautiful. At least here there was the ocean. Pearl Harbor was a military installation, but it had civilian workers too. You were one of them. Fuel lines, warehouse doors, cargo crates. You came in early every morning. Early arrivals got the good work. Early arrivals finished before noon. After noon, you could go to the beach. You'd come in early this morning. That detail mattered. You'd understand why later. You hadn't slept much the night before. You had a friend on the docks, Dominguez, a Filipino guy, tattoos up to his knees. He was always laughing. Laughed so much it could get on your nerves sometimes. You two had stayed out the night before, at a bar on Baratania Street. Small place, you couldn't remember the name. What you remembered was the story Dominguez told. A Japanese ship came through last week, he said. Didn't look like a cargo vessel. You drank your beer, didn't respond. I think it was a scout ship, he said. Dock workers always talked like that. They found mystery in everything. Even cargo manifests turned into conspiracy theories. You didn't care, because it didn't matter. Because you'd been doing this job for 4 years, and the military was always ready. Planes were always on patrol. Pearl Harbor was so powerful, nobody could even think about hitting it. You came to the dock that morning with that same thought. Nobody can attack this place. Nobody would even think about hitting this place. 7:53 a.m. Shifts were changing. The night crew was leaving. The day crew was arriving. The battleship Arizona was moored at the dock across the water. A massive ship. You looked at it every morning. There was a comfort in its size. A sharpness built from steel. Something unchanging. Something unbreakable. Something unbelievable. The man beside you was Kowalski. Polish roots. Big hands. Didn't like to talk. That was a good quality. Unnecessary conversation in the early morning was exhausting. The two of you were pulling rope, making room for a supply ship, mechanical work. Your hands knew what to do. Then the sound came. Engine noise. From the wrong direction. Coming from behind the mountains. That wasn't right. It should have been coming from the sea. If it came from over water, it would be west or south. But this sound was coming from the north. From behind the mountains. Over Ford Island. You looked up. Kowalski looked up too. The sky was clear. No clouds that morning. A blue so sharp it almost hurt. That detail came back to you later. If there had been clouds, you might have seen them later. You tried not to think about what those 10 seconds meant. The planes appeared from behind the mountain. There wasn't just one. There were more. Far more. For a moment the thought crossed your mind. A drill. There were no drills on Saturdays, but maybe today. Maybe they hadn't told you. Maybe these things weren't announced to civilian workers. Then, they dropped lower. Toward the dock. Direct. And Kowalski said something. One word. You still remembered it. Just one word. Quietly. Almost a whisper. Like saying it out loud would make it real. No. 7:55 a.m. The first bomb fell. You felt the ground before you heard the sound. The dock planks under your feet rose and fell like a wave. You felt it in your ankles, then your knees, then your chest. Then the sound came. You'd thought about that sound a lot afterward. You didn't know how to describe it. Explosion wasn't the right word. Too small a word. This sound was bigger than an explosion. It was like the air being torn open. Like a piece of the world was ripped away, and nothing was put in its place. Just a gap. And that gap filled your ears. The smoke wasn't visible yet. The smoke came a few seconds later. In those few seconds, you didn't move. Neither did Kowalski. You were both still holding the rope. Both of you. Like that rope was anchoring you somewhere. Like if you let go, something would happen. Something worse. You didn't know what, but you didn't let go. Then, the second explosion came. Anti-aircraft fire started. From across the harbor. From the warships in the water. Machine gun sounds. A scattered, panicking rhythm. And you'd never heard sounds like that before. They didn't sound like movies. In movies, those sounds were clean, organized. This was chaotic, tangled. You couldn't tell what was firing and what was getting hit. Kowalski was the first one to move. He started running, not into the harbor, away from it, moving back from the edge of the dock. You watched him. Then you ran too. That's how the first 30 seconds passed. Then you thought. And that thought mattered. Because in a crisis, not everyone runs. Some freeze. Some go back. Some run the wrong way. You knew where to go. The warehouse, the harbor warehouse, concrete construction, away from the water's edge. It had a basement level. You didn't figure that out on your own. Dominguez had said it, as a joke really. If bombs ever start falling here, run to the warehouse. But stay in the basement. Even if concrete comes down on top of you, you'll survive. You'd laughed at the time. Now you were running. The warehouse was about 150 yards away. Asphalt. Dry since there'd been no rain, but you remembered the smell of tar melting in the Hawaiian heat. It was early morning, but the ground was already warm. You felt it as you ran. There were people around you. Some were running. Some were standing still, staring up. One man was crouched with his hands over his head. Couldn't do anything, just waiting. When you passed that man, you felt something. You couldn't name it in the moment. You understood it later. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't fear. It was recognition. Last night, you could have been in that same place. If you'd taken Dominguez's story seriously. Maybe you could have been more prepared today. You kept moving. When you got inside the warehouse, there were 6 people already there. Familiar faces. Dock workers. One was injured. Arm wound. You didn't know how it happened. Another explosion. Or had he fallen? The man couldn't speak. He was just staring at his arm. You closed the door. Maybe it was pointless to close it. It was a metal door. It wouldn't stop a bomb. But you closed it. Your hands moved automatically. The stairs leading to the warehouse basement were very narrow. You went down single file. Below was a concrete floor. Damp. A heavy smell that pulled you in. Not fuel. Salt and rust mixed together. Ocean air had seeped into the ground for years. The walls were cold. You felt it when your hands touched them. December cold on a tropical island felt like this. Not the kind of cold that gets under your skin. A surface cold. But real. Sounds were coming from above. Explosions. But they weren't separate anymore. They'd merged together. You could feel the ground. You were standing, and the floor seemed to be vibrating. Rising from the soles of your feet into your legs. Constant. You tried to count how many planes there were. You couldn't. Too many. The man beside you spoke. You hadn't seen him before. Young. Maybe 19. Maybe younger. Dust on his face. Eyes wide. Are those Japanese? You didn't answer. Because you knew the answer, but you didn't want to say it. Like saying it out loud would make it real. Like naming something makes it bigger. Yes, you said finally. The young man didn't ask anything else. He leaned against the wall, closed his eyes, and in that very brief moment, you noticed something. This kid probably hadn't come from Ohio like you had. Maybe Texas, maybe Minnesota. But he wasn't different from you. Both of you had walked into an ordinary morning. Both of you had wanted a different kind of life. Both of you had found this island beautiful. And both of you were waiting underground right now, while the ceiling kept shaking. 8:10 a.m. Approximately. You didn't have a watch, but it was around 8:10. You were sure. The Arizona was already burning. You didn't know yet, but you calculated when it happened later. At 8:06 a.m., an armor-piercing bomb went through the forward magazine hatch. It reached the powder magazine. And the Arizona, with 1,182 men aboard, sank in under 8 minutes. You were in the warehouse, underground, 150 yards from where the Arizona rested. Later, they asked if you felt it. Yes, you said. The ground vibrated differently. That explosion was different. Different how? It felt heavier. 9 a.m. The sounds changed. There were still explosions, but more scattered. Engine sounds had faded. Upstairs, someone cracked the door, looked outside, closed it immediately. They're still flying. You kept waiting. 9:45 a.m. Silence. Not complete. Distant fire sounds. The collapse of something metal. Someone was shouting, but you couldn't make out the words. No engine sounds. You opened the door. Outside wasn't the same. The sky was still clear, but that blue was gone. Black columns of smoke were rising. Over Ford Island. Over the harbor. Over the ships that had been there when you left that morning. The smell had changed. That morning smell of the city, the harbor, was gone. Coffee, sea salt, engine oil. In its place was something else. The smell of burning fuel. But it wasn't only fuel. There were other things in it. Metal. And something else. You didn't want to name it, but you knew what it was. You counted your steps without realizing it. 1, 2, 3. The ground was solid. The ground was still there. That was a simple fact, but it felt important in that moment. You tried to head toward the dock. Someone told you to stop. Military personnel. Young. Armed. His hands seemed to be shaking. Civilians are being pulled back, he said. I have friends out there, you said. You're pulling back, he said. You found Dominguez that evening. He was alive, but his left hand was gone, at the wrist. He'd been caught under falling metal during an explosion. He couldn't tell it himself. Someone else told it. Dominguez wasn't talking. That man who always laughed. That man whose laughing used to get on your nerves sometimes. He was sitting in a corner, silent. You wanted to say something to him, but you didn't know what. In the end, you said nothing. You sat down beside him and waited. Sometimes that was the only thing you could do. Not leave. 2,413 Americans died that day. You learned that number later. Not that night. Days later. What you knew that night was only this. The Arizona was gone. That corner of the dock didn't exist anymore. And the rope you'd had in your hands that morning was still there somewhere. You dropped it when you ran to the warehouse, but someone must have carried it. Or maybe you had. You didn't remember. It was just there, next to your feet. You looked at the rope. It still smelled like the ocean. The next morning, they went back to the dock. Smoke was still rising from some places. Slow, thick smoke. Not like something from hell, but like something rising from the earth itself. In the shallow parts of the harbor, the hulls of ships were visible. Just below the surface, steel shapes. Familiar, but something else now. An officer spoke. He didn't speak long. You will continue working. The harbor must be operational. Nobody objected. You picked up the rope you'd been holding in your hands, and you got to work. Because what else could you do? Because stopping would make everything worse. Movement held your hand. Movement told you that you could keep going. You kept going. Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941. A date in the history books. A day. An attack. But that morning on the dock, the hands holding that rope had their own history too. The history of hands that didn't go quiet, didn't write anything down, just kept working. You were one of those hands. At 7:53, you were holding a rope. At 7:55, you were running. At 9:45, you stepped outside. At 10 o'clock, you were turned back. That evening, you sat beside Dominguez. The next morning, you came back to work. That's it. That's it. And that was everything. More than half the men at Pearl Harbor that day were under 25. Not officers, not names. People who woke up on ships, went to breakfast, thought that morning was a Sunday. The names got carved into monuments, but the names of the men holding ropes didn't get carved. They just kept going. There are things you've learned in history class, in documentaries, in films. How many minutes the attack lasted, how many planes were involved, which ships went down. But some things you can't learn. The moment a dock worker looked up at the sky at 7:54 a.m. The second you thought, no, and the steps you ran anyway. Nobody wrote down those steps. But they were taken. If this story took you somewhere, there's another door. There are other hands buried between the pages of history books, other docks, other mornings, other moments just like that one. That's where we're going in the next story. Get ready. Come with us.